movement about exactly that?
Well, I mean, for me, Bernie Sanders, I've known him for a long period of time. I've called upon him to help us out on more than one occasion.
And he's a neighbor of yours,
That's
neighboring
right.
state.
I mean, he's not far away. He's spoken at a number of events that we've done over the years, and I've had an opportunity to really get to know him, to understand how he thinks, to appreciate the fact that he's so rooted in his own values and understands who he is and what he wants to try to accomplish. And he's honest and straightforward, and something that has always appealed to me in this business, in this crazy business that we're in, where you never quite know sometimes what people are going to be on the issues, but never a question with him.
Now, many of the major unions in the country have endorsed Secretary Clinton. A few had not. The national nurses have endorsed Sanders, I believe communication workers.
Postal workers as well.
Postal workers. SEIU, for example, nationally has endorsed Secretary Clinton, but a lot of locals are not very happy about this and want to endorse Bernie Sanders.
As is the case for the State Employees Association in New Hampshire, they've endorsed Bernie Sanders, as has the SEIU affiliate up in Dartmouth College as well.
So what do you make of this division in the union movement over who to support? Because it is a reflection of something more profound.
Well, I think it's a matter of where these endorsements kind of come from. I mean, there's a lot of controversy in the labor movement about how the American Federation of Teachers or the NEA, National Education Association, came to that place where they endorsed Hillary Clinton. And the question whether or not the members had sufficient engagement in that, whether or not their voices were heard in that whole process, has been somewhat controversial. Many of the members that you talk to, and they said, look, we think we should have had more opportunity to do that. But all of that said, I think that Bernie Sanders is something that he's not part of the establishment. He's an independent voice, probably has much different relationships with these international leaders than maybe Hillary Clinton or President Clinton had. So I think I don't think it's a slam dunk for Hillary Clinton in terms of the membership themselves. The leadership is one thing. Whether the membership is engaged as well is kind of questionable, I think.
The argument that we've heard from the Clinton camp and some union leaders is the argument they're using against Bernie, that Hillary, as everyone assumes, and I think this everyone assumes is starting to evaporate, but early on everyone assumed that Hillary would be the nominee, and these union leaders, if they're going to have her ear once she's president, they better hop on early. What do you make of that as an argument?
Well, I mean, I think that there's no question that's out there. I completely understand that. But from my perspective as a person who's been in the labor movement over 40 years, if you want somebody that's going to tell you the way it is, if you want somebody you can depend on in terms of what they've said they would do and follows the line really of organized labor, then Bernie Sanders is a much better candidate for you if that is if wages and Social Security and minimum wage and trade agreements and all of those things are something you really care about, then Bernie Sanders is your person. But I agree that people are saying, well, I don't know if he's electable. I don't know if, why should we stick ourselves way out there? But I agree. I think tomorrow is going to be potentially a sea change in the way we look at politics. I think
Bernie Sanders is still ahead 15, 16 points in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I don't want to get too far ahead of it. But if he comes out of here, he held his own in Iowa. He comes out of New Hampshire in pretty good shape. And the challenge to him has always been, can he raise the money? Can he raise the amount of money you need to be, and can he connect with enough voters to win primaries like this? And I think he said in both cases he has been able to do that, as opposed to many progressive candidates who never get out of the gate.
Now, in the 2008 election, one of the things Labor was most enthusiastic about President Obama promised and didn't deliver was the Employee Free Choice Act, which is going to make it easier to organize unions. It didn't get passed during the time when President Obama the Democrats controlled both houses. They could have prioritized it, they didn't. Once they lost control of the House, it just went away. We're not hearing much from the labor movement right now about the right to organize. Bernie talks about it a bit, but there's I haven't heard, I may have missed it, any specific legislative proposals that would change that. And I think most people that look at this objectively would say, if you want wages to go up in the country, you're going to have more unionization. Why isn't that more of an issue now?
That's a good question, and I think that during that campaign, when Employee Free Choice Act was in every publication we did, the request to every candidate we ever met with, it surprises me, quite frankly, that there isn't more attention being paid to that from the AFL-CIO's perspective and from many of the candidates. And I think it speaks to the frustration that people have had around organizing, the things that you're up against now, the Citizens case where they gave corporations power, the Supreme Court's decision on Fredericks and other cases. We are getting bombarded as a labor movement. And there's no doubt that those kinds of assaults that organized labor has been under the last couple of years have taken the energy and the enthusiasm away as they try to defend themselves, constantly defend themselves, which is what the people who oppose labor unions, exactly what they wanted us to get into.
There's very little talk in American politics, although I think one of the things that's interesting about the Sanders candidacy is he does use this word, which is class. I mean, everyone's willing to say middle class, but normally it's this very mysterious thing because there's no upper, there's no lower, there's only a middle. Bernie's talking about the billionaire class, which is, I think, one of the things that makes his candidacy unique. If you look at the Democratic Party, the party itself is an alliance between sections of the billionaire class and the working class, or sections of the working class, except traditionally speaking, the working class, at least as represented by the unions, it kind of cedes leadership to the billionaire class. The candidates that wind up getting nominated are usually the candidates that the section of the billionaire class that's for the Democratic Party, that they anoint. Now, Sanders is not that, which is, again, what makes this candidacy interesting, that you actually have somebody that doesn't represent the billionaire class running.
It doesn't take their money.
It doesn't take their money.
Right.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
But the union movement, on the whole, it continues this policy, except for the few that are going with Sanders, of ceding leadership to, essentially it's not just the establishment, it's very specific. Clearly the Clinton candidacy is within the realm of the billionaire class of politicians.
Yeah.
And the unions always give, and President Obama the same thing. I used to talk to union leaders who just came from the White House, like with stars in their eyes.
Yep.
And I'd say to them, you're glowing with your meeting, but you didn't get the Employee Free Choice Act, and why aren't you saying something? And, we were just at the White House. I mean, is the Sanders the beginning of a break with that?
I certainly hope so, because not only do we not get, do we not get the right to organize in this whole thing? When you look at the trade agreements, the most recent trade agreements that President Obama is in favor of and supported, and up until a short time ago, Secretary Clinton was also in favor of and has voted for it. I think the membership is looking for some way to put increasing distance between the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and finding that middle ground, which is why I think that Bernie Sanders represents this opportunity to really say, look, we're about issues, we're about people who we can trust, we're about those kinds of things. And we're not as enamored by the parties as we used to be, and certainly not the Democratic Party. But again, there are levels to that. For instance, the national leadership is bumping elbows with President Obama and other people like that, when everyday people who are feeling this tremendous squeeze have no connection to that at all and feel increasingly frustrated by a system that has let them down. And I can tell you, just trying to turn voters out, just trying to turn our members out to do the tough work that you need to do to get somebody elected is getting increasingly more difficult. Because at the end of every campaign, they say, okay, we're all excited, we know we elected the right person, and then 6 months or a year later, what are they going to do? And why weren't they there on this thing? And trade is a great example of it.
I think one of the things that's surprising the Clinton campaign, and certainly I think surprising the media, is that people aren't more freaked out with the word socialist. And I think actually if you've been a worker in the working class, and I was a railroad worker for 5 years, I worked in the post office for 3 years, albeit in Canada, but I don't think it's that different because I know lots of union leaders down here. Large sections of the urban working class were actually never that freaked out. They even elected socialists, even open communists got elected presidents of union locals. But I think it's very shocking to the political establishment that this kind of Cold War thing isn't having an effect against Sanders so far. And what's your experience in New Hampshire?
I mean, you know, the thing about it, I mean, they certainly have tried to use it. I mean, Democratic Socialist everywhere you go. But I think that what people want, and I don't really think they care right now about what you call it. They want somebody who's going to say, look, this is what I'm saying I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do. I've been in politics for years and years, from the mayor of Burlington right on through the United States Senate. I'm not going to change my opinions. I'm not going to do things different, and that I share the values, the core values of the Democratic Party, which he has done. He just feels that, we have to move in somewhat a different direction. We have to get some of this under control in terms of the excesses that certain parts of this population enjoy.
There are sections of the working class in New Hampshire that are voting for and are enthusiastic about Donald Trump. The bartender in the hotel, a woman, I believe a working woman, I believe she has kids, because I think the essence of it is he's so impolite to establishment figures. He can look at Jeb Bush and call him a weasel. Bernie's not doing that. He's so polite to Hillary. He's so polite even to the Democratic Party establishment.
Right.
And do you think he's making a mistake in the sense that a lot of workers who you think would be far more sympathetic to the Sanders economic argument are being swung over to Trump because they feel like he's actually more defiant of the establishment than Sanders is. Now, in truth, Sanders' policy is clearly more defiant to Wall Street and big business and all the rest. But a lot of people don't get the nuance of that. They just hear Donald calling these people names, and they're kind of liking it.
Well, I think he's he's somewhat of a rogue out there. I think that he is. I think when you look at Bernie Sanders, Bernie Sanders was a United States Senator, and he's been in this business a long period of time. I think respecting people is really important to him. I don't think he sees any value, for instance, in getting in a contest with Hillary Clinton. I think she tried to drag him into this, the last debate.
Bill Clinton went after him yesterday.
Bill Clinton went after him,
but venom.
He's somewhat, I think he's somewhat, he's too polite a man and understands that really this is not about fighting with each other. This is about staying focused on what's important to working men and women and what's important for the country and bringing new people to it. And he doesn't see any value in that whatsoever. Our members really like him.
Okay, I understand that, but there is a point, at least even in substance, like he's asked during the last debate, is President Obama a progressive? Okay, in relationship to a John McCain, you could say kinda. But this is not, President Obama, I mean, one of Bernie Sanders' most serious criticisms of Hillary Clinton is that she won't appoint a Wall Street finance team.
Right.
One of his greatest praises for President Obama is he saved the country from the 07-08 crash.
Right, right.
But he did it with a Wall Street finance team. And they bailed out the country by bailing out the banks. And nobody goes to jail. We know all this. In fact, the stock prices of the banks went through the roof. They made more money. They got free money from the Fed. Yes, it helped save the Great Recession from becoming the Great Depression, granted, but very much from the interests of Wall Street. But he wouldn't come out and say that. He can't, he won't say a word about President Obama. I go back to this thing about Trump. You start feeling he's being so strategic about all this that he doesn't feel like he's just telling it like it is.
Right. Well, again, I mean, a lot of people are saying just what you said. Should he have been more, more aggressive in terms of those kinds of things? Again, I think it comes down to there's a certain, and I often wonder about this. There is a certain, I think, element and certain courtesy that you provide to those people like Hillary Clinton and other people. He's a United States Senator, and he's debated her on the floor, he's been in Congress and other things like that. I think part of that
I'm not suggesting he'd be insulting, but he could make these points.
And I think he's uncomfortable at times, that's my sense, in really reaching out and attacking, because there's some part of him that has this sense of, you just don't do that. You just...
Okay, I'm hoping you'll come back sometime today or tomorrow.
Sure,
I want to dig into more the concerns and character of the working people in New Hampshire and understand their logic.
Well, I'm happy to.
But we're going to kind of move on and hang on just for a sec. So we're going to roll to a clip. What are we rolling to? Oh, there's a clip. This is a clip. This is a clip of an interview with Bill Black, a regular guest on The Real News, and he's talking about comparing Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton on how to rein in Wall Street. But joining me now, first of all, in Bloomington, Minnesota, Bill Black is an associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's a white-collar criminologist, a former financial regulator, and author of the book that has one of the best titles I ever heard, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. And he's also a founding member of the Bank Whistleblowers United, and he'll get a chance to talk about that in a second. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Mike Conzel. He's a fellow with the Roosevelt Institute, where he works on financial reform, unemployment, inequality, and a progressive vision of the economy. Thanks very much for joining us, Mike. Bill, let's start with you. There's been a lot of debate about financial reform between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Compare the Clinton plan to the Sanders plan in terms of reining in Wall Street. They both essentially say they want to rein in the excesses of capitalism, and Wall Street is the epitome of excesses of capitalism. So how do you compare the way each of them might rein it in?
Okay, so first there's, in the econ biz, we talk about revealed preferences. And clearly the revealed preference is that Wall Street hates Bernie's plan and doesn't view Hillary's plan as a threat. They've said that in repeated global financial publications, and you've seen that in their contributions or news stories out on Bloomberg today, for example, about this. It is true that the Sanders plan is more aggressive on two critical matters. One is the so-called too big to fail, the systemically dangerous institutions. And the other is on restoring Glass-Steagall, which prior guest talked about some. But both the Sanders and the Clinton plans, in terms of Hillary's description of division of life, both of them are actually poetry instead of prose. Most of what they've written can't be implemented without new legislation, and they all know they're not going to get that new legislation. So what we did were a bunch of experienced folks from banking and regulation who, got in trouble because we told the truth and are unemployable in banking and finance, was create a very detailed series of plans that could be implemented without any new legislation and without any new rulemaking. You could, for example,
Bill, just let me interrupt you for a second. This is something a president could do by executive order if the president wanted to, or
not by executive order, but the regulatory appointees could do this without any new rules. And I can announce somebody in your locale, the first politician has agreed to pledge to support implementation of this plan in full and the contribution limits. And it's Margaret Flowers, and she is the candidate for the Green nomination for the U.S. Senate from Maryland.
Okay, so in other words, this counters the argument that nothing can be done because of the current Congress. You're saying a lot can be done because of the kind of people you would point to head the agencies that would actually implement existing law that right now doesn't get implemented so seriously. Is that, am I getting it correctly?
Right. We have deliberately crafted it so that it can be done without new legislation and without new rules. And it's quite detailed. You can see about 25 pages that spell out the specific implementation steps to do it. So, we're economists and bankers and such. Nobody ever accused us of having a capability for poetry. So it's all prose.
Mike, you wrote an article in The Nation where you talked about Sanders' proposal to break up the big banks, but that it doesn't really go far enough, that a lot more has to be done on the regulatory side in terms of regulatory changes. And in fact, you were suggesting the Clinton regulatory changes actually could be more effective than simply breaking up big banks. That I guess what you want to see is Sanders and Clinton campaigns or promises combined. Explain that, and I wonder, go ahead.
Sure. So as Bill described, this is a world as opposed to some.
Hear me? It's okay.
Welcome back to the Real News Network. We're in Manchester, New Hampshire, live covering the Democratic and Republican primaries. And now joining me in our little studio in the corner of the Radisson Hotel, around the corner from Radio Row, is Philip Levine. Philip is the mayor of Miami Beach, and I have to admit I had no idea there was a separate city called Miami Beach, but
Yes.
It's that strip.
We are a big barrier island. We're actually the most amazing part of Miami.
And a little bit of your background, just so we get some context.
Sure,
How did you, before you were mayor, you were?
Well, I'll tell you, my background is I majored in political science, University of Michigan. I had no company to go into, took a job working on a cruise ship, and ended up starting some businesses in the cruise ship industry, which I developed. Everything from duty-free stores to media, and sold them all, and decided I was going to run for mayor of our great city. And so I kind of did more of a entrepreneur business background and transitioned into serving my community.
And you are, I see they call you a surrogate. I always find that a very odd word. You're a surrogate for Secretary Clinton.
Yeah, that's what they call it. I've been good friends with Secretary Clinton and President Clinton for many, many years. And I was very involved with her in her first run for presidency in 2008. And of course, now I realize that as she was deciding she was going to run, I wanted to be as helpful as I possibly could, and I literally left the swaying palm trees of Miami Beach to come up to this incredibly cool blizzard weather up in New Hampshire.
Okay, so why, other than that you've known the Clintons for a long time, there's a race now, which is Clinton versus Sanders,
Yes.
and why are you supporting Clinton over Sanders?
Well, I think Secretary Clinton has the right experience, the right background to be President of the United States of America. And the way I look at this, to a large extent, whether it's Republican candidates or Democratic candidates, I think we're interviewing for the CEO of the United States of America. We need somebody who can run our country, move things forward, take care of our people. And I believe the Secretary has the right experience. She has the right background, the right credentials, doesn't need a training program, and I think she's the right person for the job. So that's why I'm here.
So you know the Sanders candidacy and others.
Sure.
They're one of their principal critiques of that Clinton speaking point.
Yep.
And of course Sanders has their own speaking points.
Of
Not
course.
critiquing having speaking points. Is that if you actually examine the experience, there's some things to be concerned about. And
Okay.
obviously, first and foremost, is her support for the Iraq War. Now, you know, close to 1 million people were probably killed in that war.
Okay.
Thousands of Americans, but I would think, actually, in many ways, more importantly, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. It's completely destabilized the region. Mm-hmm. President Obama understood to be against that war. Bernie Sanders understood to be against that war, but Secretary Clinton voted for it. Doesn't that give you pause about her record?
No, not at all. Matter of fact, you talk about war, you talk about revolutions, and I think that's what really had happened in Iraq. You know, Senator Sanders, he's out there espousing a socialist revolution. And from a mayor who's from Florida, who grew up in Florida, we know a little something about revolutions, especially socialist revolutions.
All right,
I guess what I'm saying is that...
One sec. I'm more than happy to talk about Bernie and socialism and revolution, but I asked you about the Iraq War.
Right,
and I have to say, I've watched so many interviews, both
Yes.
with Secretary Clinton and with her surrogates.
Sure.
And every time anyone asks about the Iraq War, they talk about something else.
Well,
so you
well,
got to
I'm happy to talk about it. Of course, you know, the fact of the matter is the Secretary made that decision at that time. She made that decision based on the information she was presented with. And I think the Secretary has said very clearly that she thinks she made a mistake at that point. You know, I'm an entrepreneur in business. I've done a lot of great things. I've also made mistakes in my life. One of the things I've always prided myself on is that when I make a mistake, I learn and I move on. You know, she has the right experience. She knows what she can do. And so I think that when we look at the total life and the public service that Secretary Clinton has had for so many years and all the great things she's done to serve our country, one could pick out many decisions in everyone's career, whether it's Republican or Democrat, including my own, that weren't 100% the right decision.
But voting for a war when so many people with the same information were against it, like, you know, millions, something close to 20 million people around the world demonstrated against that war before the invasion. There were even leading generals, people that understood the region.
We could talk about everyone's vote, and I agree with you. I mean, you know, Senator Sanders, you know, voting in favor of the NRA. Do you want to talk about how many people have died because of handguns? I mean, we could have that conversation too.
Yeah, but I'm not here defending.
But was that a mistake or judgment mistake of Senator Sanders to vote in favor of the NRA? I mean, those handguns have killed so many people across that country. Those weren't Iraqis; those were Americans. So I mean, you know, we could talk about decisions that were right or wrong. But I think the fact of the matter is that when you're interviewing for somebody,
but if you're talking about their record, if you're talking about their record,
absolutely,
one has to talk about the record. You can't use the record as a plus and then not let me talk about it.
But we look at the record. This is a woman that went to Yale Law School, and she didn't go into private. She actually went out and helped the Children's Defense Fund. You know, she became an incredible First Lady. She was an amazing United States Senator, and she was able to work with both sides when she was a senator. She was a fantastic Secretary of State. Let's talk about when she was Secretary of State. Let's talk about the great sanctions she put in place to literally push the Iranian country so they were able to make a deal with the United States of America. So I think, when look at someone's record, you can come up with 100 things that were great. You can come up with a few things that weren't great. I think everyone, but the fact of the matter is, Secretary Clinton has the experience.
This is where you're doing your talking points very well, but the record needs to be examined. For example, in Libya, and she shares this with President Obama. This is not just Secretary Clinton, but the United Nations resolution on Libya was clearly defense of Benghazi. There was no allowing in that resolution for the overthrow of Gaddafi and turning it into regime change. Quite the contrary. The leaders at the time, including President Obama, including Cameron from England.
Listen, we can get into Benghazi and all this stuff as long as you want.
I'm not trying to get into the embassy
because we know what happened there. We understand once again this was an incredible, wonderful.
No, we're talking about a question of
coalition
judgment.
of many forces, and I think the Secretary has great judgment. You know, once again, I'm telling you based on my experience. When you're running a country the magnitude of the United States of America, you're looking for a CEO. You're looking for a commander-in-chief. And I can tell you based on resumes, we're talking about the primary right now, there isn't much of a choice. Clearly, Secretary Clinton is the right person for this job. And Senator Sanders is not. And of course, I think what we're finding right now with the polls, they're tightening up. You know, she won New Hampshire in 2008. I think we're going to see her actually win New Hampshire now, because the fact of the matter is, we didn't expect her to get this close. This is Bernie Sanders' home state. This is his home field advantage. Look what's going on right now.
The polling now is what, about 15?
No, it's about 7 or 8 point different right now. It's literally tightening up. It's literally tightening up.
As of last night, Real Clear Politics had it at about 16%.
Check this morning, it's actually gotten even tighter. And I think that's what we're seeing all the way until tomorrow.
I'm not surprised it could.
Yeah.
But let's talk, you wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders' call for socialist revolution. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, no, I was just going to say, because you brought up revolution, we brought up war, and I said...
No, I brought up war, you brought up revolution.
I come from a state of Florida where we have a lot of people that have a lot of experience with socialist revolutions. We've had one in Cuba, we had one in Venezuela, had one in Nicaragua. You know, they were promised a lot of things, these people. There's no question about it. Well, I can tell you right now, those people are all living in Miami. They've left those countries because making empty promises is a great way to get people to buy into your dream. The problem is you can't deliver. And that's the key here. I know that Senator Sanders he's got a tremendous record.
Hang on for 1 second.
Yes.
If you're going to look at Bernie Sanders' policy, he's not talking about nationalizing American industry. He's talking about a health care plan that's like Canada's. Sure. So if you're going to compare what he's calling for, you're going to have to compare it to Canada and Europe, not to Cuba.
Well, I'm not so sure
Cuba's
about
a whole
that.
other conversation.
Well, we can compare it to France. I'm not sure we want to be France. I mean, that's probably more in line, because listen, I think...
Have you seen French health care?
I got to tell you something. Everybody I know, every company from France, all the employment from France, It's leaving France. They're coming to the United States.
No, a lot of employment left the United States.
No, but they're all leaving, coming to the United States. France itself, it has literally like the last person out of France needs to carry the flag. Because that's what's going on. You know, with socialist revolutions, I think it's easy to sit up here in New Hampshire and talk about it because you don't necessarily have the experience of what it's like to go through it. It never starts necessarily, but listen, it never starts with it's only going to be this, it's only going to be that. But that's how you begin, and that's how your system transcends.
No.
Oh, yes.
Where did that ever happen? In Cuba?
Oh, what happened in Cuba? Listen, let me tell you
Castro
one thing.
called for socialism. Castro, it was
absolutely,
they had an armed
and
revolution.
It only started with socialism. It's only going to do this. Well, you know what? It didn't work out that way.
No, I don't
Same
think
thing
so.
with Hugo Chavez. That's how it began there.
Listen, at
the
some
American
point,
dream.
I'm happy to talk to you sometime
but
about
I think
Cuba
it's
and Venezuela.
You brought it up. I think the American
but he's
dream
advocating
is
what
crucial.
happened in Europe and Canada, obviously.
Well, that's a great way to begin. But you know what, though?
Let me ask you a question. Did Medicare for All or the Canadian health care plan, has that led to a socialist revolution in Canada?
Right. In fact, the matter is not yet, of course. I understand that.
I think it's happening. It's on the way there.
Think about this. Why would we want to kill the American dream? I think what Secretary Clinton is about, we want to make sure everyone has health care. There's no question. But you know what? We don't need Donald Trump's kids to have health care for free. Why do we want to soak the middle class with huge taxes to pay for all that? We know one thing. If you offer everybody free health care, and you're going to offer them free education, we're going to destroy Wall Street. You know what? I understand Senator Sanders now is offering free Uber, possibly. Maybe free Starbucks. Maybe free Netflix for everybody. You know, when is this going to end?
He's not.
Well, the fact of the matter is, you can sell all dreams. But when it comes to reality, we have this other thing called the Republican Party, and they're not that interested in that. And what you need is a candidate and a president that can work with the Republican Party to actually move things forward. Build on affordable health care. Build on making sure that these young people don't have these massive loans to their college education.
Wait a second. Affordable health care was passed over the screaming body of the Republican Party. It wasn't very collaborative.
So what would you like to do? Tear it down and offer universal? You'll never get there.
Oh, no.
Build on what
I would
you
want
got.
to do is another question altogether. What Sanders is proposing is transitioning from the Affordable Health Care Act to Medicare for All.
Yeah.
He's in no way saying, let's tear it down. I mean, that's a misnomer.
I think so. I think that's what's pretty much come out. So it's a matter
Let me ask you a question before we end. If you think that Sanders reforms, if he was president, if he could pass any of this, leads to a Cuban socialist revolution, then does that mean if he is the nominee, you couldn't support him?
Well, I think most importantly, he's not going to be the nominee because when you look at the national polls across the country, Clinton is way, way ahead.
Oh, no.
Listen, I can tell you this. When it comes to states like Florida, there's no way someone pushing for a socialist revolution is going to get the nomination. It won't happen in Florida. It certainly doesn't look like it's going to happen in Georgia. Okay? So when you look at the various states where the massive populations are, where we have the ethnic African Americans and we have the Hispanics, I really believe Secretary Clinton is going to carry the day, and she's going to be the nominee.
And
so I think the conversation may be a little mute.
Okay, but if she isn't, it's sounding like you wouldn't support.
You know what? The fact of the matter is, and I think that if for some highly unlikely reason that Donald Trump became the nominee, I think that's what we're talking about, or if some unlikely reason that Bernard Sanders became the nominee, which is never going to happen, I think you'll probably have to have a third party. I think that's what will end up happening. And I think it could be a former mayor.
And you might support that person.
Well,
I think it's not going to happen. Highly impossible situation.
It's going to be so highly unlikely, but I think that Secretary Clinton will get the nomination, and she will be the next president.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And let me talk to my studio here. We got, what are we doing next, guys? Okay, well, Jessica Devereaux, one of our producers and journalists, was out in the field and she was talking to some voters and I think, in fact, some Hillary supporters. So we're going to throw to that now.
Who is actually close to the fence, as she describes it, in making her decision about whether or not to support Hillary or Bernie Sanders. So, Erin, tell us, what are you wrestling with?
Well, right now, what I'm mostly concerned about is, based on the primary, who is going to actually turn up for the general election. I don't think that Hillary is going to be able to continue the progress that Bernie has made with young voters like me. I think most of my friends, if Bernie doesn't get the nomination, are probably not going to show up in November. And if they don't show up, the Republicans are probably going to win, or will have a greater chance of winning. So that's the thing that really matters the most to me. There are some other issues that I'm not sure I agree with Hillary Clinton on.
Can we talk specifics?
Well, some of her issues, I think the biggest problem I have with them are that she's not consistent.
Yeah.
And I know, like, I don't want to punish anyone for changing their mind about things, because I change my mind all the time. You might feel one way about something and then 10 years later find out that that's actually not a good thing. But the idea of, like, campaigning for something like NAFTA and then later coming around and saying that you were never in support of it, like pretending that you never had a different opinion, is what I don't agree with, because I don't really know who I would be voting for. I feel like she has different opinions depending on who she's with. So I can't trust her opinions on issues because she changes them. So I think that it's great that she supports this thing, and then she gets into White House and no longer supports it. I'm going to feel kind of like I was lied to.
I understand. And a lot of people feel that way, specifically on trade, as you mentioned, with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Her as Secretary of State actually helped organize and orchestrate the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now she's against it. I don't know if you saw this, but the